What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for the latest episode of Broncos Now. As always, I'm your host, Sydney Jones. And coming up on today's episode, the Broncos are back on the road tomorrow as they head to Detroit to face the Lions on Saturday night. We'll hear today from head coach Sean Payton, all three coordinators, and cornerback Pat Surtain. Plus, Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala joins the show for a game preview. All that and more coming up. The Denver Broncos hit the road tomorrow as they head to Detroit for a Saturday night matchup versus the Lions. We heard today from head coach Sean Payton as he talked about the Lions offense and what his impressions are of that unit.
Good offense has that balance, and these guys obviously commit to running the ball well and the ability then off play action or drop back. So it's not just one thing. You know, in other words, somehow or another, you have to affect the quarterback, number one. Because there are enough weapons when you look at the runners, the tight end, the receiver. And then number two, you know, your early down efficiency, getting to those third downs that are more favorable, I think. So it's not one thing, and it's not like an easy thing. But you have to have some mixed looks. These guys do a great job of packaging plays at the line of scrimmage, and they'll have a menu of 3 or 4 different plays. They'll run a shift, and then you'll see Goff reset and kind of signal what play he wants based on the information he's seeing defensively. So it's a little cat and mouse game.
Plus, defensive coordinator Vance Joseph spoke about the Lions' run game and what this defense needs to do to stop it.
It's a run-first offense. It's an offense that has an experienced quarterback. You know, if the play-action pass is working, it's tough to stop them. You know, you have 2 good backs in Montgomery and Gibbs. They both can hit home runs in a run game, and they have a good tight end and a good receiver. So that's NFL football. You know, every week it's the same. It's quarterback, it's receivers, it's run game, it's pass game. So for us, it's about us doing things right and you know, tackling and in coverage, playing great leverage and taking the ball away. That's our formula to win.
And both head coach Sean Payton and Vance Joseph talked about how the defense has been so effective on third down situations and what the key to that has been.
I would say it starts with the ability to speed the clock up. You know, if the quarterback, when we all used to play football in the streets, you know, we'd have 3 Mississippi or 4 Mississippi rush, or I'm not sure. But if you can get it to 2.5 Mississippi, in other words, you know, he's having to get rid of the ball quicker. Obviously, that helps the back end. So between the coverage on the back end and then the ability to speed the clock up for the quarterback.
Just doing it right, you know, and you know, being exact in our responsibilities, and the pass rush is pretty good with a mixture of pressure. It's a combination of things, but it's really just doing things right and having guys who can really cover, you know, and that's the key on third downs.
Cornerback Pat Surtain also spoke to the media today and talked about where he feels like the defense is at right now.
We're not even close to our best, I believe. There's still a lot to improve on, a lot to work on as a defense, and we all know that. We all know there's a little bit left in the tank, and you know, when we got that mentality and that mindset, a lot of great things could happen going forward.
He also went on to talk about the areas they can improve on.
Just finishing all 4 quarters, being a dominant defense to the whistle blows, you know what I mean? So just having that same tenacity from the start to the finish, I think that's what's key. And I feel like communication could be a little better, but you know, sometimes, you know, you could end up in the right spot and communication go out the window. But I just think communication and just finishing.
Offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi talked today about how the Lions have taken on head coach Dan Campbell's mentality as a team.
I know Dan very well, and we were his office was right next to mine in New Orleans for 5 years, so you can just see, you know, what you see from him in the press conferences, and you know, that toughness and grit and sense of humor. I mean, that's who he is all the time, and so you can see that this team has really taken his personality on, the toughness, the grit.
Now it's time to take a look at this week's final injury report. Outside linebacker Nick Bonito and tight end Greg Dulcich both did not participate in practice today and have been ruled out of Saturday's game. Plus, outside linebacker Jonathan Cooper, safety P.J. Locke, and tight end Chris Manhertz were all limited. P.J. Locke received a questionable status for Saturday's game. And guard Quinn Miners and running back Samaje Perine were both full participants. Now joining me here in the Broncos podcast studio for a game preview is Broncos lead writer Eric Dalala. Eric, thanks for joining me today. We got a big one this Saturday.
Yes, it's exciting. Prime
Very
time.
exciting. I've never been to Detroit either. I'm excited to see Ford Field.
That's I have 2 stadiums left on my list.
This is one of them?
This is one of them, so it's big.
Wow, that's really big. What's the other one?
Atlanta.
Atlanta. Ooh, we're not going there for a while.
6 more
we went
years,
back in
so.
2020.
Yeah.
Or we were there in 2020.
We'll see what happens.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're checking one of the two off. Eric, we just finished looking at the injury report. Nick Bonito and Greg Dulcich, they've both been ruled out. PJ Locke, he is listed as questionable heading into the matchup. So, who do you expect to step up for Bonito? And then for PJ Locke, what will it mean if he's not able to go?
Yeah. Starting with Bonito, obviously you saw Jonathan Cooper and Baron Browning, the two starters at that position, play well. Drew Sanders has seen increased time at outside linebacker here in recent weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously, he got some snaps there against the Chargers. And then I think after that, we'll just kind of have to see what happens. The Broncos waived Ronnie Perkins on Thursday, and we'll see kind of what they do at outside linebacker. Obviously, there's ways around that depending on how you want to bring pressure, what you want your front to look like, that sort of thing. But obviously, Nick Bonito will be missed. But I think Jonathan Cooper and Baron Browning have played well, been really critical to this team's success, and I would expect that to continue. PJ Locke, hopefully he's able to go. I think particularly from a run defense standpoint, he's been great in terms of his ability to fly up to the ball. I think about a couple of times against Cleveland where he was near the line of scrimmage making plays on either rushing attempts or short passes. So if he's able to go, that would be a huge boost for this Denver defense. If not, maybe you're looking at Delarian Turner-Yell. I don't think we've seen J.L. Skinner get any game time, but obviously he could be an option as well. But, we'll have to see. Obviously, that's one to watch here as we get closer to Saturday night.
Absolutely. Eric, you mentioned the run defense. I know defensive coordinator Vance Joseph, he spoke earlier in the show about needing to stop the run. How do you think that unit will fare going up against this Lions run game? That's been really effective.
Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah.
Both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are near the top of the league in terms of all-purpose yards. They run the ball effectively, and it kind of sets up their whole offense in terms of play action, throwing it down the field to Sam Laporta. That's what they do best. They want to control the time of possession. They want to, stack the carries and make it so it's hard to get off the field, get those thirds and shorts. In a lot of ways, it's similar to what Denver wants to do offensively, right? And they're really good at it. And you look at some of these top rushing teams, and the Lions are right up there with anybody, and it makes everything go, like I mentioned. I think the key will be if you can stop them from from running the ball effectively, from getting in these second and short, third and shorts, then you have the opportunity, I think, to bring some pressure on third and long, keep them out of clear play action scenarios and force them to drop back and throw the ball. That's when maybe you can bring some blitzes, get to Jared Goff. He's struggled a little bit against the blitz this year, particularly in recent weeks. So you've got to start there in terms of getting them in pure passing situations. But you're right, Sid. And Vance Joseph has said this, Justin Simmons has said this, if you cannot stop the run against this team, it's going to be a long day because it sets up every single thing they do. They're getting, a couple of their offensive linemen are listed as questionable, but they were full participants on Thursday, so it looks like they could go. So they're getting a little healthier up front, which will not make it any easier on this Denver defense. But we've seen an improvement, right? It's still not perfect, about 120 yards rushing allowed per game since week 7 for the Broncos. And Detroit averages, I believe, around 135, 140 per game. So they're a good rushing team. But earlier in the season, it was up near 170, 180, and certainly we saw teams go over 200 rushing yards against the Broncos. So it's gotten a lot better. They're still, I think, working on it. And one of the things that Vance Joseph mentioned was tackling when you have a chance. I don't think this is a game where you can let a guy, if you have an opportunity to tackle him on the edge, you can't miss that tackle and let him get 5, 6, 7 more yards,
for sure.
or worse, break into the second level and break it for a big one. The first guy there has got to be able to make that tackle, and then people have to swarm to the ball. Maybe a couple tackles for loss that puts the Lions behind the chains. Certainly, they're not impossible to stop, but if they're running the ball well, it becomes a lot more difficult to get them off the field.
For sure. Eric, Pat Surtain said something today that kind of stuck out to me. He was asked about kind of the evolution of this defense and where they're at right now, and he said they're not even close to being at their best, which, given how much success they've had recently outside of kind of the run defense, like you just mentioned, what's the next step for them, you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of unreal to think about. If that's actually, if that's true, that they can be a lot better, that's spectacular because they're already allowing fewer than 16 points a game since week 7. They forced all these turnovers, right? Third down defense, best in the league.
Right.
So they're playing really good football. So let's not discount that.
No, for sure.
I do think this is the time of year where you've got to continue to play at that level and play well against, high level offenses. If there's some things to clean up, against Houston, we saw the big plays hurt them a little bit.
Yeah.
The run defense certainly I think could be a little bit better. And then Pat talked about being good at all times and, not allowing teams to get back in games or not allowing teams late in the game to have success. And I think actually they've been better at that this year than they have in a lot of other years. Even when this defense was really good, I think you saw a tendency, when the Broncos would get a big touchdown on offense and finally, get a lead or tie it up or whatever, the defense would immediately allow a score. And we saw that a couple of times last year, right?
Yeah.
I think, Tennessee game that happened where the Broncos get a big score and immediately the Titans go down the field. We saw it in Baltimore where they play great all game, but then the last drive of the game, not able to get a stop.
Right.
So I think they've actually been better there, but continuing to just have that success across all 4 quarters, and particularly, I think, starting fast, ending strong. The Broncos offensively have done well in kind of that middle 8 where they've scored right before the half. But, there's not a ton for this defense, I think, to improve on.
I agree.
But if there's a few minor things, it's the big plays, it's the consistency, and maybe in the run game.
Definitely. Eric, there's been a lot of talk this week just about Lions head coach Dan Campbell and how the team really reflects who he is, what his mentality is, his grittiness. So looking at his defense specifically, how do you think Russell Wilson and company will fare going up against them?
Yeah, they're tough, right? And I think the whole team continues to fight, and they're not going to give in. We've seen a couple times recently where they've been behind by quite a bit and have continued to fight and stay in the game. So, even if you jump ahead early, I don't think this is a game where you can just assume they're going to lay down and it's going to be over. Defensively, there might be a little bit of an opportunity for the Broncos to take advantage. This defense has struggled in recent weeks. Since week 10, they're near the bottom of the league in scoring defense, yardage, sacks, takeaways forced. So, it's possible that the Broncos could find some success. Detroit's dealt with a few injuries that have been impactful on the defensive side of the ball. But a couple of things. One, it's key, I think, for the Broncos to start fast offensively, certainly on the road in a hostile environment. If you can avoid falling behind, I think you've got a really good chance to be in this game right till the end and find a way to pull the upset on the road. I think back to Houston, and the Broncos second through fourth quarter were probably the better team, but they dug themselves too big of a hole in the first quarter and did not play well. And they couldn't come back from it. And so that can't happen in Detroit. Detroit has been a slower starting team here, particularly in recent weeks. Against Chicago, they were able to initially come back and then ended up losing the football game. But when they played Chicago in Detroit, that was a big issue. They ultimately won the football game, but gave Chicago a big lead. Green Bay, the same thing when they played over Thanksgiving. So if this Denver offense, which has been good on first drives of the game, if they're able to score, even if it's a field goal, but obviously a touchdown is great, I think that puts you in a good position to succeed. And then that also, we just talked about the Broncos defense, but if the Lions are behind, it's harder for them to stick with that running attack, especially if you stop it early. And so if they have to start throwing the ball, dropping back to pass, that plays into, I think, what the Broncos do well defensively. But it's got to start on offense, starting fast, scoring points, and getting ahead of this team on the road.
For sure. Yeah, Eric, you mentioned earlier, we're back in prime time. With the Lions sitting at 9-4, what do you think a win would just mean over this team?
Yeah, I think, well, one, it helps your playoff chances drastically, and probably need to go 3-1 down the final 4 games. Every one of these playoff predictors kind of shows that. But if you get this one, you buy yourself a little wiggle room down the stretch here. You keep your division hopes alive. Sean Payton said this week, hey, we're 1 game back in the division. We're focused on that. And if you can win this game, suddenly those hopes, I don't know if they're likely, but certainly they become realistic. And if the Chiefs falter in a division game down the stretch here, the Broncos would be in really good position there. So it helps your playoff odds. It helps the division race. Even if you end up in the wild card race, certainly this changes a win like this would potentially change your seeding. It gives you some wiggle room, all those things. Yeah. But I also think it sends a message to a lot of people of what this Broncos team is capable of. And I know people are taking the Broncos seriously now as a playoff team potentially, but you still don't hear a lot about them as contenders, to win the AFC or to, go to the AFC Championship or something along those lines. Yeah. And I think if you go to Detroit and beat a 9-win Lions team, NFC North leading team at home, 7 wins in your last 8 games, have beaten teams like the Bills, like the Chiefs, like the Browns. I think people start looking at this team differently, especially because it's in prime time. And listen, it doesn't really matter how people look at you. It's still the same team either way. But this team is playing really good football, and I think that recognition would be well-deserved if they're able to get this win, and you'd get a victory against a really good football team.
Well, really looking forward to it. Eric, appreciate you joining the show today.
You got it, Sid.
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Broncos Now. Broncos Country, thanks so much for tuning in. Hope to see you all in Detroit this Saturday, but if not, I'll meet you right back here on the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube on Monday following the game. I'll see you all then.